It is said that the Duke of Thornbridge did not marry a woman so much as he curated a tragedy. In the glittering ballrooms of Mayfair, they whispered that Everett Vane, a man whose very silhouette was a testament to the divine symmetry of the heavens, had finally found the one thing his vast wealth could not fix, a wife who broke the line of his perfect world. This is a story for those who know that the deepest wounds are often the ones we hide beneath silk and lace, and that true beauty is not found in the absence of scars, but in the courage it takes to carry them. If this tale of burning secrets and a love born from the ashes touches your soul, please subscribe and leave a comment sharing which historical era moves you most. Your support helps these stories find their way to those who need them. Chapter 1. The Porcelain Cage. The dining room at Thornbridge Manor was a masterclass in the neoclassical ideal. Every candle in the massive baccarat chandelier was clipped to the exact same height. Every silver fork lay precisely 2 inches from the edge of the mahogany table, polished to a mirror shine that reflected the cold, handsome face of the man who sat at its head. Everett Vane, the Duke of Thornbridge, was often referred to in the broadsheets as the aesthetic Duke. He moved through life as if he were a sculpture come to animation, his standards for beauty so exacting that even the ivy on the estate walls was trimmed to ensure no leaf disrupted the harmony of the stonework. He took his wine from crystal that sang when touched, and his conversation from men who spoke in perfect rhythmic cadences. And then there was Rose. She sat at the opposite end of the long table, a vast expanse of polished wood separating them like a desert of indifference. Rose wore a gown of midnight blue, the collar rising high against her neck, her sleeves extending to her very knuckles. To the casual observer, she was a picture of modest Victorian propriety. But Everett was not a casual observer. To him, she was the crack in his favourite vase. "The centrepiece is lopsided," Everett said, his voice as cool and smooth as a river stone. He didn't look at her. He looked at the arrangement of white lilies between them. "I believe the footman has lost his eye for proportion. I shall have to speak with him." Rose reached out a gloved hand, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted a stray petal. "He is young, Everett, and perhaps beauty is not always found in perfect lines. Sometimes the tilt of a flower is what makes it look alive." Everett finally lifted his gaze. His eyes were a piercing crystalline blue, beautiful and utterly devoid of warmth. "Life is messy, Rose. Art is eternal. I chose you because your father promised a lineage of grace and history. I did not realize I was inviting a shadow into my gallery." The words cut deeper than any blade, but Rose did not flinch. She had learned long ago that to show pain was to invite his pity, and his pity was far more caustic than his disdain. She knew what he saw when he looked at her. He saw the twisted, silvered skin that began at her collarbone and snaked down her left arm, the remnants of a nursery fire she barely remembered. He saw the imperfection that kept her from wearing the sleeveless silks of the season. "I shall retire to the library," she said quietly, placing her linen napkin beside her plate. "I believe Leo is waiting for me to finish the story of the Odyssey."
"The boy spends too much time with you," Everett remarked, swirling his burgundy. "He is my ward, Rose. He needs to learn the carriage of a gentleman, not the maudlin fancies of a woman who hides in the dark. He needs to know he is loved," Rose countered, her voice gaining a rare edge of steel. "Leo doesn't care about symmetry, Everett. He cares about the warmth of a hand. You should try it sometime. You might find it more substantial than your statues." She turned and swept from the room before he could answer, her heart hammering against her ribs. She loved him. That was the greatest tragedy of all. She loved the way his brow furrowed when he read ancient Greek. She loved the hidden vulnerability she glimpsed when he thought no one was watching, the way he stared at the portraits of his late parents. She saw a man who had built a world of glass because he was terrified of anything that could actually bleed. Upstairs, the nursery was a different world. Here the air smelled of dried lavender and old paper. Leo, a boy of 7 with unruly curls that would have driven Everett to madness, jumped from his bed the moment she entered. "Rose, you're late. Odysseus is still stuck with the Cyclops." Rose laughed, the sound rich and genuine, a stark contrast to the stifled silence of the dinner table. She sat on the edge of the bed, and as Leo scrambled into her lap, her sleeve rode up, revealing a glimpse of the puckered white scar tissue on her wrist. Leo didn't recoil. He reached up and traced the edge of the scar with a small, sticky finger. "Does it still hurt?" he whispered. "No, Leo," Rose said softly, tucking his chin up. "It's just a map of where I've been. Every scar is a story of something we survived. It means we were stronger than the fire." "I think they look like silver lightning," the boy decided, yawning as he leaned against her chest.
Rose held him tight, staring out the window at the dark, rolling hills of the estate. She was the Duchess of Thornbridge, mistress of one of the grandest houses in England, yet she felt like a ghost haunting her own halls. She was a woman of fire living in a house of ice, waiting for the day when the two would finally meet, and praying that when they did, she wouldn't be the one to shatter. Deep in the house, she heard the distant, rhythmic ticking of a dozen grandfather pops, all synchronized to the exact same second. Everett's world was perfect, orderly, and dead. She closed her eyes, feeling the heat of Leo's breath against her neck, and wondered how much longer she could survive the cold. Chapter 2. The North Wing Inferno. The storm did not arrive with a gentle patter of rain, but with the violent roar of a sky that seemed intent on shattering the earth. At Thornbridge, where every pane of glass was polished to a crystalline gleam, the thunder rattled the sashes like a prisoner demanding release. Inside his study, Everett Vane sat stiffly, his quill scratching rhythmically against parchment as he tried to ignore the chaos of the elements. He loathed the wind. It was untidy. It tore leaves from trees and scattered them across his manicured lawns with a reckless disregard for his meticulously planned vistas. Then the world turned white. A bolt of lightning, jagged and cruel as a Norse god's spear, struck the ancient dry ivy clinging to the stone of the north wing. For a heartbeat, there was only the blinding flash, followed by a crack of thunder that shook the foundations of the manor. And then came the smell, the acrid, terrifying scent of wood smoke and parched greenery. Everett was on his feet in an instant, his chair overturning with a crash that would have normally horrified him. He didn't care about the chair. The north wing housed the nursery. It housed Leo. "Fire!" The cry went up from the kitchens, a jagged tear in the fabric of the evening silence. "The north wing is alight!" Everett sprinted into the hallway, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He reached the gallery leading to the nursery wing, just as a second explosion of heat roared through the corridor. The ancient oak beams, dried by a century of seasons, had become a tinderbox. As he reached for the door handle, the ceiling groaned, a deep tectonic sound, and the upper gallery collapsed in a cascade of burning timber and plaster. Everett was thrown back, the air knocked from his lungs. He scrambled to his feet, coughing as the air turned to grey soot. Through the wall of flame and the heap of burning debris, he heard it, a high, thin wail that made his blood run cold. "Everett, help me!" It was Leo. The boy was trapped on the other side of the inferno, his voice muffled by the thick, choking curtains of smoke. Everett threw himself against the obstruction, his fine wool coat singeing, his hands blistering as he tried to heave a blackened beam aside. But the structure was a mountain of fire. It wouldn't budge. He was the Duke of Thornbridge, master of all he surveyed, and he was utterly, devastatingly powerless. "I can't get through," he screamed, his voice breaking. "Leo, stay low, hide!" Suddenly, a shadow moved through the smoke behind him. It was Rose. She wasn't screaming, she wasn't weeping. She stood in the center of the hallway, her face illuminated by the flickering orange light. She had torn down a heavy wool-woven tapestry from the wall and was dousing it with the contents of a decorative water urn.
"Rose, get back!" Everett yelled, reaching for her arm. "The gallery has fallen! It's suicide!" She looked at him then, and for the first time in their 3 years of marriage, Everett didn't see the shy, retreating woman who hid her hands in gloves. He saw a warrior. Her eyes were wide, reflecting the dancing flames,
but they were devoid of the panic that had paralyzed the rest of the household. "You stay here," she said, her voice low and steady, vibrating with a strange authority. "If I'd bring him to the gap, you must be ready to take him." "Rose, no!" But she was already moving. She draped the sodden, heavy tapestry over her head and shoulders, disappearing into the furnace. She didn't hesitate at the threshold of the flame. She walked into it as if she were returning home, her body moving with a haunting familiarity toward the heat. Inside the nursery, the world was a kaleidoscope of red and black. Rose could feel the heat searing her lungs, the familiar, terrifying prickle of skin beginning to blister. It was a sensation she had carried in her nightmares since she was 3 years old, but today she did not run from it. She followed the sound of Leo's sobbing. She found him huddled under the heavy oak bedstead, his face pressed into the rug. The room was breathing fire. The ceiling was bowing under the weight of the flames above. "Leo," she croaked, her throat raw. "Come to me." The boy scrambled out, his eyes white with terror. Just as Rose pulled him into the protective folds of the wet tapestry, the main support beam of the nursery ceiling gave way with a sickening crack. Rose didn't think. She didn't calculate. She simply threw herself over the child, her body a living shield. The burning wood struck her across the shoulder and back, the weight of it threatening to crush the breath from her body. She screamed, a sound of pure, primal agony that pierced through the roar of the fire. But she did not let go.
With a strength born of desperation, she shoved the smouldering beam aside, her hands catching fire for a terrifying second before she smothered them in the wet wool. She hauled Leo up, tucking him under her arm, and began to crawl. She knew the service ducts, the narrow stone-lined passages used by the sweeps. They were cramped and soot-filled, but they were stone. They would not burn. Outside, Everett was a man possessed. He had managed to clear a small opening in the debris, his face blackened, his hands raw and bleeding. He was sobbing now, a sound he hadn't made since he was a child. He had lost everything, his perfect ward, his wife, his sense of the world's order. Then, through the swirling smoke near the servants' entrance at the base of the wing, a figure stumbled out into the pouring rain. It was Rose. She looked like a creature made of ash and shadow. Her beautiful blue gown was charred to rags. Her hair was a wild, singed halo around her face, and her arms were wrapped tightly around a shivering, soot-stained Leo. She took 3 halting steps into the mud of the driveway. The rain lashed down on her, steam rising from her scorched clothing. Everett ran toward her, his boots splashing in the puddles. "Rose!" he cried, his voice a ragged whisper of disbelief. She looked at him, her eyes glassy and distant. She carefully lowered Leo into Everett's shaking arms. He's safe," she whispered. As soon as she was sure the boy was held, the strength that had animated her seemed to vanish like smoke in the wind. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed into the mud at his feet, her scarred hands finally still, her breathing shallow and ragged as the north wing burned like a funeral pyre behind them. Chapter 3. The Soul Beneath the Silver. For 3 days the silence at Thornbridge was not the curated, peaceful quiet Everett had once demanded. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a tomb. The north wing lay in blackened ruins, but the true devastation was contained within the master bedchamber. Rose had not woken. Everett refused to leave her side. When the village physician arrived with a flock of nurses, Everett dismissed the women with a snarl that bordered on the feral. His hands, which had once only touched the finest vellum and the cold marble of Greek busts, were now stained with the yellow of medicinal salves and the redness of his own blisters. He insisted on being the one to wash her. With a basin of warm water and a soft linen cloth, he began the agonizing task of cleaning the soot from her skin. As he worked, he had to truly look at her.
not as a piece of his collection, but as a woman. He saw the new, angry burns on her shoulder where the beam had fallen, a testament to her sacrifice for Leo. But as the water cleared away the grime of the fire, he found himself staring at the old scars. The silvered, roped skin on her arm and collarbone didn't look like an imperfection anymore. In the soft light of the candles, they looked like armor. He realized that while he had been obsessing over the curve of a vase or the symmetry of a garden, Rose had been carrying the physical weight of a courage he couldn't even fathom. He reached the crook of her elbow, where the scarring was thickest, and he didn't pull away in disgust. Instead, he felt a crushing, hot wave of shame. He remembered every cold word, every time he had asked her to wear higher collars, every dinner spent in a silence he had enforced because he found her disturbing.
"I am a fool," he whispered into the quiet room, his voice cracking. He bent his head, his lips grazing the scarred skin of her forearm. "I looked at you for years and saw a flaw. I should have been looking at you and seeing a saint." He spent the night whispering apologies to her sleeping form, tracing the maps of her bravery, realizing that the harmony he had sought his entire life was a lie. The only thing in his life that had ever been real was the woman currently fighting for her breath because she was too brave for the world he had built. Chapter 4: The Debt of Fire. On the fourth morning, while searching Rose's vanity for a clean ribbon to bind her hair, Everett's fingers brushed against a small, velvet-lined box. It fell, spilling a heavy gold locket onto the floor. The locket was old, the gold worn smooth by years of being clutched. He snapped it open, expecting to see a portrait of her father. Instead, he stared into the painted eyes of his own mother, the late Duchess of Thornbridge. Confusion turned to a cold, creeping dread. He pulled a letter from the bottom of the box, yellowed with age, written in his mother's elegant, flowing hand. It was a letter of thanks to Rose's father, dated 20 years ago, the year of the great nursery fire that had claimed his parents' lives and nearly his own. The truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. Everett had always been told he survived that fire because a servant had reached him in time, but the letter told a different story. Rose, a toddler of only 4, had been visiting the estate with her father that day. When the smoke rose, she hadn't run for the gardens, she had crawled into the burning cradle to shield the infant Everett with her own small body until the adults arrived. The scars he had mocked, the disfigurement he had used as an excuse to exile her to the shadows of his life, were the very marks she had earned saving him. He collapsed into the chair by her bed, the locket clutched so tightly in his fist that the metal bit into his palm. He had called her ugly. He had treated the woman who had burned for him like a broken toy. The aesthetic Duke was utterly destroyed by the irony. His perfect life, his very breath, had been bought with her pain, and he had repaid her with a coldness that was its own kind of fire. Chapter 5: Beauty Redefined. The ton expected the Duke of Thornbridge to disappear. They expected him to send his marred wife to a sanitarium on the coast to recover in private, sparing the polite world the sight of her injuries. Instead, 1 month after the fire, Everett Vane threw the most extravagant ball the county had ever seen. The ballroom was different. The statues were gone, the cold white lilies had been replaced with wild, vibrant roses of every color and shape. When the doors finally groaned open, the room went silent.
Everett did not walk out with a debutante in pristine silk. He walked out with Rose. She wore a gown of shimmering gold, designed with a daring, sleeveless bodice that made no attempt to hide the silver scars on her arm or the new healing marks on her shoulder. She looked like a queen forged in a furnace. A hush fell over the crowd. Lady Danbury lowered her glass. The Marchioness of Gwent leaned in, her voice a sharp whisper that carried across the floor. "What a tragedy," the woman murmured. "To let such a tragedy mar the beauty of a ducal house. One would think she'd have the decency to cover herself." Everett stopped. The music died. He turned to the Marchioness, his gaze so cold it seemed to freeze the very air. "You speak of tragedy, madame," Everett's voice rang out, clear and commanding. "I see no tragedy here. I see the history of a woman whose beauty is written in acts of courage that none in this room could hope to match. My wife is the only thing in this house that is not a hollow decoration. If you find her scars disturbing, it is because you lack the soul to understand what they represent." He turned back to Rose, his expression softening into a look of such raw, unshielded devotion that it brought tears to the eyes of the younger ladies. He took her scarred hand and kissed it in front of every judgmental eye in England. "You are the fire, Rose," he whispered. "I was just the cold stone waiting to be warmed." Everett didn't just change his heart, he changed his world. He sold his perfect collections, using the fortune to turn the rebuilt North Wing into a sanctuary for those the world deemed broken. He learned that a life without scars is a life that is never truly lived. And every night, when the sun dipped below the horizon, he didn't look at the symmetry of his gardens. He looked at his wife, finding more beauty in the silver lines of her skin than he had ever found in the stars. True beauty is never found in the absence of a struggle. It is the gold used to mend the cracks in a shattered vessel, making it stronger and more precious than it was before the break. For Rose and Everett, the fire didn't end their story. It was the light that finally allowed them to see one another.